document to the National Assembly with 3 possible candidates to replace Jorge Glass. In a parallel development, the Assembly Audit Committee has been meeting to analyze the impeachment trial against the former vice president. 10 inmates have been killed and several others injured in a gang battle in a prison in the city of Goiânia in Brazil. Brazilian police said that at least 100 prisoners escaped following the gang fight, but 27 of them were recaptured. A decapitated body was found amongst the dead. According to the authorities, violence erupted when inmates from one cell block invaded 3 others, where prisoners from rival gangs were housed. The French journalist Ignacio Ramonet has published an article looking back at the 12 victories choked up by the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro in 2017. Ramonet says Maduro has been the most unjustly slandered president in Venezuelan history. Among his remarkable successes in the past year, Ramonet singles out the diplomatic defeat of attempts to intervene at Venezuela at the OAS, the restoration of peace after 4 months of violent opposition protests, which left over 120 people dead, and the successful election of a constituent assembly, followed by victories in the regional and local elections and the restarting of a dialogue with the opposition in the Dominican Republic. Strong rains have flooded the central Bolivian city of Santa Cruz, causing power outages and public transport failures. At least 3 municipalities have been affected by the overflowing of the river Paraguay. Much public transport was out of service as a result of the floods, and a bridge that connects Santa Cruz with the other communities in Parango collapsed as well. Heavy rains and electrical storms have affected Paraguay's capital city and another 7 municipalities. The intense rain caused flooding in many streets and power outages, according to the Energy Administration Department. Technicians are working to repair electrical connection and establish power in the affected areas. The lower house of Congress in Paraguay has voted to reject President Horacio Carter's cuts in social spending as public sector workers protest outside the Parliament building to demand more money for health and education. Our correspondent in Asunción, Osvaldo Zayas, is at the Congress and sent this report.
We're in the Paraguayan Congress, where the lower house has just rejected the partial veto by President Horacio Cartes of the public expenditure budget for 2018. We remind you that the president's partial veto means big cuts for sensitive areas like education, health, and the public electricity system. Public sector workers from these services are mobilizing outside the Congress. They want the Senate to discuss the budget and ratify the original version, which was sent to President Cartes without those cuts. We should also point out that Paraguay has the lowest public spending on social services of any country in the region. About 3.7% of GDP is spent on education, much less than the 7% recommended by UNESCO. The public sector workers will continue their mobilization to see what the upper house decides. That's all for the moment. Back to you in the studios.
The partner of Peru's former leader, Alberto Fujimori, has people in neighboring Chile very concerned. Social organizations, activists, and family members of victims of Chile's former dictator Augusto Pinochet are taking the opportunity to step up their fight for human rights and for the just punishment of war criminals.
Every Friday, a group of families of the victims of the dictatorship march around the government palace to demand the closure of the Punta Peuco prison. It's a privileged jail created to lock up human rights violators from the regime of Pinochet, and which President Michelle Bachelet promised to shut down. Today, the family members march with special concern about what is happening in Latin America after the pardon of former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori. They will also announce how they will face their recently elected right-wing government.
Here we are, fighting, demanding justice, demanding truth, demanding that they close down Punta Peuco prison. In our case, demanding that they do not give pardons and benefits to the prisoners for crimes against humanity.
They will continue to fight, conscientious that under the government of Sebastián Piñera, they possibly face a bleak scenario.
For us, the victims' family members, we're living through a very difficult political moment in our country, but also across Latin America, and that has led to the enforcement of human rights violations to be diminished.
Signs of impunity by the conservative right-wing movement here, bolstered after the recent presidential election, have generated reactions between the leftists, social activists.
My message to all the Latin America continent is to stand together as a leftist movement to resist these attacks on human rights. Former presidential candidate, today dedicated to being a clown politician, José Antonio Cast, said that having people like Alberto Fujimori in the jail is an act of vengeance.
Michelle Bachelet's human rights program will leave concerns and uncertainty regarding how justice will be implemented over the next 4 years. Family groups have already announced actions.
In a meeting we held in Valdivia, we found a way to reinforce 16 victims groups at national level for detained, missing, and politically executed people to find justice and look for answers.
Families of the victims of the Chilean dictatorship will continue to march every Friday around the government palace demanding truth and justice.
And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Welcome back. 2017 was the most violent year in Mexico, with almost 10,000 assassinations under President Enrique Peña Nieto's administration. Violent crimes took place in 655 of the 2,000 municipalities in 29 states, including Mexico City. The rates are 59% higher than in 2016 and double that of 2015, according to official police records. Economic inequality is hurting the most vulnerable members of Argentine society. Economists have revealed that the nation has accrued the second largest debt in 2017 and that it's closely linked to the government's adjustment policies.
In the last trimester of 2017, Argentina's foreign debt rose to $216 billion. The money was intended to finance the imbalance between the country's current and capital accounts and holds a higher interest rate than other countries on the continent.
La Argentina en estas condiciones no tiene sustentabilidad en el largo plazo.
In these kind of conditions, Argentina has no long-term sustainability. The government is betting on investors. But if we take a look at the amount of money that investors actually brought to the country, the story is different. The money that became part of the physical and productive economy, which creates jobs, is 3.6 billion. On the other hand, the country's debt over portfolio investments, based mainly on speculation, is 3 times as big.
For Andres Asiain, closing out the year in debt with rising budget deficit, inflation and dollar rates out of control are all indicators of the failure of President Macri's economic model. Regardless, Asiain assures that digging into the government's cuts tells us there are the conditions imposed by the international financial market.
There's a political and ideological project by the government that wants to move in sync with other countries in the region, such as Brazil and its labor reform, which is a series of reforms that infringe on workers' rights under the guise of making the market more flexible and competitive.
Parallel to protests that ended with brutal repression and the wounding and imprisoning of many protesters, the ruling party signed into law an economic reform package. Furthermore, the government intends to bring to Parliament the much maligned labor reform in February.
We demand that this government starts to take money from those who have the most, from transnational businesses, from accumulated capital, from mining and agricultural companies. We the people, the workers, will mobilize as much as it is necessary in order to put a stop to this adjustment plan, to put a stop to this systemic repression which has already claimed the lives of 2 young militants.
2017 was also marked by mass layoffs, an increase in the poverty rate, political and judicial persecutions, jailing of opposition members, and further advances against freedom of speech and of the press.
Family members of the workers on the missing Argentine submarine will send a formal letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin to request that his government not abandon the search for their relatives. The 44 crew members' families also said that they want to thank the Russian president for providing 3 vessels to aid in the search for the submarine that disappeared on November 15, 2017. It's been 18 years since the administration of the Panama Canal was given back to the Panamanian government after being in the hands of the United States government for decades. Since then, there have been numerous projects to modernize and expand the canal, but the profits from those projects have not been evenly distributed.
This building is home to the canal's administration. It's been in Panamanian control for 18 years. Yet most Istemeños have not benefited from this.
Esa es una contradicción histórica que nosotros tenemos como nación.
It's a historical contradiction for our nation. After saying the light of liberation, getting the canal back, the oligarchy returns to power. We are living in this contradiction.
The fight for sovereignty in the 20th century left along the way the lives of many fighters from the Hoy social movement. Regardless, the dreams of these people have yet to be fulfilled even after the canal was returned to Panama.
The
martyrs did not fight so that the gap separating social classes would only grow bigger. This happened after we got the canal back. Profits do not equate a better education or a better healthcare system. Here we see who benefits from the return of the canal and the billions that are being earned by the administration.
Over 20% of Panama's population lives beneath the poverty line, despite the fact that the canal is responsible for an annual influx of over $1 billion to the economy. Another reason that signals why the fight must continue.
Ahora lo que le corresponde a los panameños es que los recursos del canal sean usados.
What the Panamanian people deserve is to see the canal's benefit be used collectively for the betterment of their lives. This is a social fight that belongs to the Panamanians who are committed to a more just society.
Recently expanded and seeking to obtain new floodgates, the canal continues to grow. The fight no longer is to get it back, but to see its profits benefit everyone.
5,000 indigenous people in the south of Mexico are to return to their communities in Chalchihuatan after being forced to flee because of violence. The local council says that the government of Chiapas state, as well as the judicial authorities, must provide guarantees to the residents and assume responsibility for their safety. On October 18th, a neighbor of Chalchihuatan was murdered, causing thousands to flee in fear of aggression from their neighbors in Chinalao. And creativity and technology are joining forces in Mexico to fight against pollution. In the next report, we look at the case of Diego Cardenas, a young man who decided to make bicycles out of bamboo.
Mexico City is one of the most polluted in Latin America. The high number of cars means that the citizens spend up to 2 hours a day in traffic. Mexicans are increasingly looking for an ecological transportation system, like the bicycle. But Diego goes further, using bamboo instead of the traditional materials.
Es como romper un paradigma que existe en la modernidad, ¿no?
It is like breaking a paradigm that exists nowadays. This feeling to resolve everything with metal materials that may last thousands of years. But it's best to use a material that can last a lifetime, if it's taken care of properly. For something like a bike and without exploiting the mind.
In his workshop, natural fibers combine with high technology to make truly unique machines.
Buscamos no domar la naturaleza.
We seek to take the best of nature, to take advantage of it and transform it, to make it useful and to not damage the environment.
In addition to caring for their environment, the products of this workshop are characterized by their aesthetics and functionality, although many people are surprised to learn what material they are made of.
The first thing that they ask is if they are resistant. Many doubt that bamboo can last as long as we say. They also ask if it requires special care. They even ask if they need water or things like that.
However, this belief usually doesn't last long, as it happened to Olga when she rode her bike for the first time almost a year ago.
It's the best design that I have found. I have always used bicycles and I have had many different models. When I tried this bicycle, it fulfilled all my expectations.
It is calculated that the number of people using bicycles in Mexico City has doubled in the last 10 years. Some estimates suggest that it transports almost 500,000 citizens daily.
The remains of centuries-old Dutch and British ships have been discovered off Mexico's Caribbean coast. A team of archaeologists have been examining the wrecks of an 18th century Dutch warship and a 19th century British steamboat, as well as an old lighthouse. They were found 2 miles from the coast near the small seaport town of Sisal in the Yucatan Peninsula. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Hundreds of Palestinian children have been illegally detained by Israeli forces in 2017. And since Trump's announcement of the U.S. decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that number has gone up dramatically.
According to a report by Defense for Children International, or DCI, in Palestine, 2017 saw over 200 Palestinian children illegally detained by Israel's occupying forces, out of which at least 90% have been victims of some sort of violence during their detention and interrogation. This same report also says that ever since President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital 2 weeks ago, the number of Palestinian children being detained has increased. Since mid-December, 148 children have been apprehended. Israeli soldiers have also started putting up wanted posters around Palestinian villages in the West Bank that read, "We are the army, be careful, we will catch you if we see you," in an attempt to intimidate young protesters saying that rock throwers are endangering their safety.
We got very afraid when they put our pictures up. They're threatening us that they will arrest us and they will come and take us from our home.
On December 19th, 16-year-old Ahed Tamimi was forcibly removed from her own home by members of the occupying army. On Monday, she was charged on 12 counts of military criminal charges by an Israeli military court, among them aggravated assault and throwing stones. Ahed is an activist that wants to raise out awareness about human rights violations committed by Israeli occupants in Palestinian territories. Her activism began in 2009 when the main water source of her town of Nabi Saleh was taken away. This increased protests against the Zionist invaders. Ever since, Ahed has been a victim of innumerable attacks and endless abuse, among them the murder of her family members.
As she liked to call herself, as a freedom fighter, or a fighter for the Palestinian issue.
In 2012, the young girl became well known thanks to some images where she brandished a fist in the face of an Israeli soldier. Similarly, in 2015, she bit the hand of an Israeli soldier to free her younger brother. She is considered to be an icon of the resistance against the West Bank occupation thanks to her rebellious attitude and determination.
And now let's have a look at some of the stories making headlines around the world.
On New Year's Eve, which included a policewoman and her boss being repeatedly kicked and beaten in a savage assault that was filmed and posted on social media.
People need to remember that 15 police officers are hurt in the line of duty each day. 5 are injured each day due to assaults. So we're talking about it a little, but it's a daily reality, every day, for our colleagues who work in neighborhoods.
California has begun selling recreational marijuana on January 1st, in what's seen as a milestone in the mainstreaming of the weed. Hundreds lined up to buy it outside stores licensed to sell the drug long before opening hours, and a store owner said they had stocked up in expectation of huge demand.
I think it's so exciting. I love it. We called a couple days ago and we asked if they'd be open for recreational, and they talked to us about the licenses they had, and everyone was stoked. I think it's awesome. It's fun. Yeah.
A crash between a passenger bus and a truck ferrying goods has killed 36 people on the main highway connecting Kenya and Uganda. The accident occurred in the Maari area. The initial investigation suggests the bus driver may have lost control or the brakes failed, leading to the collision. At least 20 people have been killed and dozens more were wounded when a Saudi airstrikes hit a crowded market and a petrol station in Al Jarahi district of Hodida. Relatives of the victims expressed their rage and devastation at the attack. The death toll is expected to rise as many of the wounded are in critical condition.
The President of the United States welcomed 2018 with the approval of just 1/3 of U.S. citizens. In the next report, we look at which sectors are rejecting his administration and which are supporting it.
Donald Trump enters the new year as the least popular president in U.S. history, with a 32% approval rating within 346 days of his mandate, according to a study by the pollster Pew.
I think he's corrupt and dishonest, and I disagree with most of his policies.
Clearly has demonstrated over and over again that he has no respect for women. And then, of course, he goes and says he does, but your actions speak louder than your words.
Demonstrations in the country began in 2017, and the majority were against President Trump. According to the latest data registered in September, 83% of the protests were called to oppose policy announcements by the president.
The other reason I'm fighting is we have regimes around the world that are hostile, and Trump's making it worse, like North Korea, like the Middle East. I want those countries to see that he does not represent us.
Only 17% of Latinos approve his administration, and African Americans are the least favorable of him, with only 7% believing he's doing a good job.
I don't support him because I don't think his ideas align with the needs and the wants of the African American community.
And he's just, divided the country. I mean, look what happened in Charlottesville. He didn't even denounce those white supremacists there, and we're just really torn up about it. It's just horrible because I was in the civil rights movement of the 60s in Atlanta with Dr. King, and I mean, I feel like we're going to have to get back out in the streets again to fight.
The majority of his supporters are white Americans over 50 years old.
I want jobs within our country, so I feel like it's more down-to-earth people who want to have him elected and not those people who are. It's not a bunch of extremists out there that are supporting of him.
The fact is that the White House leader has lost support in every sector of the population during these 346 days of his administration in 2017. Now, it is still to be seen if the trend downwards will continue in this new year.
At the beginning of January, the legal status of 190,000 Salvadorian residents in the United States will be jeopardized when they face the possibility of losing their temporary protection status, or TPS, and be obliged to return to their country of origin. Details in this report.
The arrival of 2018 brings with it serious concerns for this Salvadoran woman. She will receive a letter that will determine her own and her family's future. The White House has until January 8th to decide to extend or end the permission known as TPS, which has allowed Evelyn to work legally in this country for more than 20 years. Losing this status now means she will run the risk of being deported.
It's a feeling that white people do not understand. People who are racist do not understand it. It's a feeling that we carry, and it's very hard. It's a difficult feeling for us.
Evelyn fears that they will separate her from her 3 children, who are American citizens. Around 190,000 Salvadorans have the TPS and are in similar situations.
Most of us have more than 2 jobs. I have 2 jobs. At 3 a.m. I am already at my first job.
TPS carries the permission to work and live in the United States, granted to citizens of nations that went through natural disasters, epidemics, or wars. In the case of El Salvador, it was granted after the devastation of Hurricane Minch in 1998.
We have come to leave energy and youth to this country. We have paid our taxes. We have fulfilled the laws because every 18 months there is a renewal of TPS and we have to do a checkup with the FBI. And if we've done something bad in our record, our TPS is denied.
In the anti-migration policy framework, the government of Donald Trump has announced the TPS expiration date for citizens of 16 other nations, such as Haiti, Honduras, and Nicaragua. This doesn't only result in the separation of thousands of families, but it affects the economy of the countries, reducing their remittances. For example, 59,000 Haitians already know that they can only remain legally in the United States until July 2019. Evelyn fears that the Salvadorans holding TPS will run in the same luck, and therefore need to participate in the Tipitians National Alliance to fight for the right to remain in this country.
In Iran, anti-government protesters have clashed with state security forces as demonstrations entered their sixth day. Clashes in the central town of Kadirajan have left 6 dead when protesters tried to occupy a police station which was set on fire. 9 people in total were killed overnight, bringing the death toll to 21 since protests began. More than 450 protesters have been arrested in Tehran in the past 3 days. But pro-government protesters remain strong, with thousands continuing to take to the streets across this country in support of President Rouhani and the clerical leadership. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has made his first statement since the unrest began, saying that Iran's enemies were orchestrating a plot to infiltrate and target the government. South Korea has proposed high-level talks with Pyongyang after the North's leader Kim Jong-un called for a breakthrough in relations. North Korea suggested inter-Korea dialogue and said that the country might attend the Winter Olympics in the South in February. South Korea has proposed a meeting next Tuesday on the border town of Panmunjom. China has welcomed the possibility of the first high-level talks between the two since 2015. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.